The battlefield burned with chaos. Flames licked the sky, smoke choked the air, and amid the storm of destruction stood a young boy with flaming red hair and polished armor that gleamed in the firelight. A sword hung loosely in his hand. Despite the colossal threat before him, he wore a small, almost serene smile. Towering over him, a dragon roared, its body wrapped in fire as if it were born from the blaze itself. The boy's party braced beneath its looming shadow. Then, with no warning, the boy sprinted toward the beast. His allies moved instantly, launching spells and arrows to shield his advance. The Saintess planted herself firmly and summoned a radiant magic circle at her feet, her hands aglow with divine light. The boy leapt, soaring high above the ground. Suspended in midair above the dragon's burning crown, he raised his sword. A fairy girl on the ground called out, her voice filled with pride and excitement. She cheered for him to strike, calling him by name, Luke. With a single, flawless movement, Luke brought his blade down. The steel cut clean through the dragon's neck. The massive creature collapsed, its severed head crashing beside its body. A tidal wave of cheers rose from his party. Pride lit their faces. Luke stood before the carcass, sliding his sword calmly into its sheath. He stood like a man shaped by legends. That evening, the group made camp beside the dragon's fallen body. Fire crackled in the darkness, throwing long shadows against tents and armor. Luke sat beside the flames and asked the others about the next job. An old man with a thick gray beard looked up from the fire and replied that the next dragon would be a tougher challenge. The Saintess offered Luke a smile and remarked that he would handle it just fine. But Luke corrected her gently, saying that they all would. Then everything shattered. A bloodied hand reached out from the dark. Luke dropped to his knees, a gaping hole torn through his chest. Blood spilled freely as his breath caught in his throat. Shadows closed in. As his vision adjusted, he saw faces he knew. His own party. The same people he just fought beside now stood against him. The old man stepped forward, expression blank, and declared that this was the end of the road for Luke. Confused and fading, Luke tried to speak, barely able to form words. The old man explained coldly that the kingdom had placed a bounty on Luke's head. The words hit harder than any blade. The Saintess stepped closer, guilt swimming in her eyes. She asked for his forgiveness, saying that the decision pained them too, but they had no other option. Luke, desperate and furious, shouted to know why. The wound in his chest blazed with betrayal. Then another voice cut through the air, calm, cruel. Someone called him a monster. Luke looked up in disbelief. The old man spoke again. He said Luke was the only S-rank warrior left in the kingdom, that he had destroyed countless monsters and saved the nation more times than anyone could count. But now, with the threats mostly gone, he had become the greatest threat himself. He continued, explaining that one dragon could destroy a kingdom, but one man who could kill dragons alone could destroy much more. Luke struggled to speak, insisting he never intended to turn against the kingdom. The Saintess interrupted, stating that no one could truly know the future. As she spoke, she raised her holy sword. Luke reached for his weapon, but the old man raised a hand and snapped his fingers. Instantly, magical chains wrapped around Luke's body. He couldn't move. He couldn't resist. The old man told him to rest in peace. This was the only mercy his comrades could offer. Luke fought against the chains. Another party member laughed, mocking him. The man who slew dragons now looked pathetic. A girl behind the old man commented on the masterful magic that bound Luke. Luke's eyes scanned the group, settling on Elle. He said that this had to be a mistake. The old man then ordered Elle to finish it. Elle stepped forward, wand raised. Luke stared into her eyes. Her hand shook. Her eyes filled with tears. She broke down and cried. The others watched in silence, disappointment on their faces. The Saintess stepped forward, lifting her holy blade, and asked if Luke had any final words. Luke's gaze sharpened. There was no confusion in his eyes anymore, only rage. He told them to remember this moment. And then, with a flash of divine steel, the world went dark. Luke's head dropped to the ground. 3 months later, far from the grand cities and endless wars, in the quiet backwaters of Azima, life moved with the illusion of peace. But inside a tiny village, chaos broke loose. A swarm of demonic bees tore through the air, sending villagers running for their lives. People screamed, clutching their loved ones and dragging children into shelter. In the heart of the frenzy stood a lone figure, cloaked in black and masked. He faced the beasts head-on. Nearby, a young woman watched with fear and confusion. Her name was Lilim, the village apothecary. The masked man spoke calmly, telling her to stay back. Then he raised his hand and announced that pest control was beginning. With a single chant, he unleashed fire. Flames erupted in all directions, obliterating the bees instantly. In seconds, the sky was clear, but so was the ground. Trees, grass, even soil turned to ash beneath the intensity of the spell. The village cheered. He had saved them. But Lilim stood frozen, staring at the devastation. Her eyes weren't filled with gratitude. They held suspicion. She had never seen magic like that. Later, inside the chief's home, Lilim slammed her hand on the table. She insisted something was wrong with the masked man, Lugo, as he called himself. The old chief, calm and composed, asked her to explain what exactly bothered her. Lilim thought it over, then laid out the facts. Last week, Lugo had handled a pack of wolves alone. The week before, he had scared off a charging cyclops with just a look. Before that, he crushed a gang of thieves in one night. The village chief gave a casual smile and asked Lilim whether they shouldn't be thankful for everything Lugo had done. Lilim groaned, rubbing her forehead, and admitted that yes, they probably should, but she still insisted it was strange. She paused, then pointed out that 3 months ago, the S-rank adventurer Luke had died. And it was exactly then that Lugo appeared in their village. Leaning forward, her voice low and eyes narrowed, she asked what if Lugo had killed Luke? What if he was hiding from the bounty now placed on his own head? She emphasized that he never removed his helmet, not once. The chief laughed softly. He remarked that if Lugo really was that dangerous, then they should count themselves lucky he hadn't decided to kill them too. And besides, he added, nothing bad had happened since Lugo arrived. Lilim sighed, irritated by the chief's infuriatingly simple logic. It didn't erase the gnawing doubt in her mind. Still skeptical, she asked where Lugo was now. The chief replied offhandedly that he had sent Lugo to deal with the black bear. Lilim's eyes widened at the casual tone. She told the chief sharply that monster extermination shouldn't be treated like a grocery errand. Unwilling to ignore her instincts, she set out into the forest on her own. Lifting one finger, she muttered a spirit spell and summoned a glowing wisp. The guiding spirit darted ahead, tracking Lugo's magical trace deep into the woods. As she followed, her thoughts spiraled. She wondered who Lugo really was and what he might be hiding. Eventually, she spotted him, or at least, she thought she did. Lugo sat motionless on the ground, completely still. He wasn't resting or asleep. Just still. Lilim crouched behind a bush, watching with confusion. Before she could process it, a voice whispered right behind her, asking what she was doing out there. Startled, she turned and gasped. Lugo stood behind her. Lilim asked how he had gotten there when she'd just seen him sitting ahead. Lugo replied calmly that what she saw was only his afterimage. Lilim blinked, struggling to understand. Then, anger bubbling, she exclaimed that no ordinary person used abilities like that. Lugo, unfazed, asked again what she was doing in the forest. She quickly brushed off her suspicion, saying that she just came to check on him after hearing he had gone to deal with the black bear. Lugo offered reassurance, explaining that he had set traps to catch them. But Lilim frowned, saying even the knights from the royal capital struggled with black bears, and he was expecting to handle them with traps. Lugo didn't argue. Instead, he invited her to see for herself. He led her to a small clearing where he placed a beehive dripping with fresh honey on the forest floor. Without speaking, he cast a silent gravity spell around it, warping space itself, hiding a death trap beneath a harmless scene. Then they both crouched in the bushes, waiting. Minutes crawled by. Then came a growl. A massive black bear burst from the trees, drawn by the honey. Its eyes locked on the hive, and it lunged like a beast possessed. The moment it crossed the invisible barrier, a crack split the air. The spell collapsed inwards. The bear's body flattened instantly under the crushing weight of raw force. Lilim stared, stunned. She thought to herself that this shouldn't be possible. And yet, more bears arrived, each drawn by the same trap, each crushed just as swiftly. One after another, they fell. By the time the hunt ended, a mound of slain black bears covered the forest floor. Lilim stood speechless. Taking down just one of these monsters was a feat. Lugo had defeated 10. Effortlessly. She looked at him, searching his expression for anything, pride, excitement, exhaustion, but found nothing. He remained composed, silent, as if it had been routine. But something inside Lilim burned now. Curiosity, suspicion, something deeper. She needed to know who this man really was. That night, Lilim sat by candlelight, a quill in her hand, her diary open in front of her. Her pen moved slowly across the paper as she reflected on everything that had happened. She wrote that since the death of S-rank adventurer Luke, monster threats had spiked around the world. Farms destroyed. Livestock stolen. Supply lines crumbling. And even their isolated village of Azima was beginning to feel the tremors of that global unrest. The next morning, her suspicions deepened. She stood frozen, sweat sliding down her neck, as word spread through the village. Another attack had happened. The coachman, gasping and still pale, explained that the supply carriage had been ambushed. He said the culprits were sylphs. Wind spirits known for their deadly speed. They hit fast, took everything, and vanished into thin air. He added that he barely managed to save a few crates. Lilim's heart sank. The danger was growing, and so were the questions surrounding Lugo. Lilim rushed to inspect what had been salvaged. But the moment she opened the crate, her heart dropped. It was filled with nothing but empty bottles. She slumped against it, a wave of frustration washing over her. How was she supposed to make medicine now? Before she could collect her thoughts, a shrill voice pierced the air. An old woman wailed in horror, crying out that her precious sweet buns had been stolen. Lilim tried to soothe her, reminding her that there were still other buns in the village. But the old woman snapped, shouting that those weren't just any buns. They were S-rank buns. Absolute masterpieces, she insisted. She couldn't go on without them. Lilim blinked, momentarily stunned. S-rank buns? The thought of trying one crossed her mind. A voice suddenly cut through the noise, asking why everyone was in such a panic. Lilim turned to respond, and froze. Lugo stood before her, calm as ever, carrying a crate. The coachman immediately pointed at him, exclaiming that it was one of the stolen crates. Lugo explained that he had spotted a group of sylphs causing trouble at the edge of the village and found the supplies with them, so he took them back. Relief flooded Lilim's face. She thanked him, saying now she could finally make medicine. Villagers crowded around, checking their reclaimed goods with joy. But something tugged at Lilim's attention. She glanced at Lugo and asked if something was wrong. Lugo hesitated. Then he said that there should have been more crates. He frowned, analyzing the load. Judging by the carriage's size, the number of crates recovered was far too few. As if to confirm his words, the old woman shrieked again. Her buns were still missing. Lilim ran to check her own supplies. Her fears were confirmed. Her crate, too, was empty. Realization hit Lugo hard. He had been fooled. Furious, he clenched his fists, then stomped the ground with enough force to crack the earth beneath him. Without a word, he turned and stormed into the forest. Lilim followed, concern for the village outweighing hesitation. As they moved, Lugo shot a glance sideways and asked why she was trailing him. Nervously, Lilim explained that she only wanted to observe. Unbeknownst to them, a pair of sharp eyes watched from the treetops. A sylph named Pasha smirked to herself, muttering that Lugo may have caught her off guard last time, but this time, she had laid traps, lots of them. In a flash, Lugo raised his hand and fired a blast of fire magic straight at her hiding spot. The explosion sent smoke and splinters into the air. Pasha tumbled from the branches, coughing violently. Before she could flee, Lugo appeared beside her, gripped her by the head, and ordered her to lead them to her queen. As they traveled deeper into the dense forest, Pasha, now seemingly cooperative, handed over a hand-drawn map. She said it marked every trap between them and the queen, who resided beneath the heart of the forest. Then she asked, a hopeful lilt in her voice, if she could go now. Lugo's response was cold and simple, no. Pasha burst into tears, calling him cruel. Lilim, watching the display, felt a sliver of pity and asked Lugo to release her. After all, they now had the map and didn't need her anymore. Lugo didn't answer. Instead, he pulled Pasha closer and suddenly began tickling her. Caught off guard, she flailed and yelped in protest. Something slipped from her clothing and hit the ground. Lilim bent down to retrieve it, confused. Her expression darkened when she realized what she was holding, her own underwear. Her voice shook as she demanded to know why Pasha had it. Lugo explained matter-of-factly that this was a common sylph tactic. They used theft magic to snatch clothing, hoping to create confusion and make an escape. Lilim turned to Pasha, eyes narrowing, and asked if it was true. Pasha pointed directly at Lugo, accusing him of spinning lies, suggesting maybe this was his plan all along. Lilim's face flushed deeper. She admitted that Lugo might look suspicious, but she trusted him. Lugo said only that trusting sylphs was pointless. Lilim exhaled sharply, then turned back to Pasha with fire in her eyes, commanding her to take them to the queen immediately. Not long after, deep in the heart of the giant tree forest, fire and destruction tore through the sylph nest. Flames rained from above, lighting the trees in hellish color. Screams echoed as the winged beings scattered, fleeing from the storm of magic. At the center of it all was Lugo, relentless and wordless, fire spells erupting from his hands. Pasha, now bound tightly, led him and Lilim through the chaos, guiding them toward their goal. Eventually, they reached a vast gate carved into the roots of a massive sacred tree. Pasha gestured playfully and said this was the queen's chamber. Her tone suggested amusement, hiding something beneath her grin. Lilim stepped forward and asked sternly if there were any traps inside. Pasha giggled and claimed there weren't. This was sacred ground, and no traps were allowed. But Lilim didn't buy the smile. She warned Lugo not to let his guard down. Without a word, Lugo raised his hand and unleashed a powerful fire spell. The blast shattered the gate in an instant. Inside, amid the smoke and debris, stood a regal figure dressed in ornate robes, the fairy queen, Temia. She rose slowly, blood trickling from her lips as she coughed. Lilim gasped. That spell should have killed her, but Temia gave a cold smile and said such magic was beneath her. She staggered, another cough betraying her words. Lugo's voice cut through the air as he asked if it was the blessing of the fairy king that protected her. Temia smirked and confirmed it, adding that no one could lay a finger on her. Lugo stepped forward, demanding to know where the stolen supplies were. Temia tilted her head and feigned ignorance. Lugo pressed again, this time asking what they planned to do with stolen weapons and medicine. The queen's smile widened. She said plainly that they were preparing for war. The room fell silent. Temia declared that with Luke, the only S-rank adventurer, now dead, humanity was vulnerable. She announced that they would take what they wanted and reclaim what was rightfully theirs. Then, with a sudden motion, she pointed at Lilim. Before Lugo could react, a strange light enveloped her. Her soul began to tear from her chest. Lugo shouted in alarm, but it was too late. Lilim's body collapsed into his arms, empty, lifeless. Her soul floated into Temia's grasp. The queen smiled, saying her theft magic extended even to the soul. She turned her hand to Lugo, casting again. Blinding light flared, then fizzled. Confused, she tried again. Nothing happened. Lugo raised his head, his voice cold. He explained that her magic wouldn't work on someone whose magical power exceeded hers. Temia's eyes widened. Pasha whispered in disbelief that it was impossible. No human should have more power than the fairy queen. Lugo said nothing. Instead, he removed his helmet. A cascade of red hair fell out. His gaze, familiar, piercing, met theirs. Temia staggered back. Pasha turned to her, asking what was wrong. The queen's voice shook. She said that long ago, the previous queen warned her never to cross paths with certain humans. The S-rank adventurers. But that man was supposed to be dead. Hearing this, Pasha's eyes flew open in disbelief. The queen whispered his name. Luke Othyde. In this world, there exists a divine gift called a blessing. And Luke carried the blessing of the phoenix. The miracle it granted was immortality. Luke, silent, burning with fury, stared at the soul in Temia's hands and said that he would take back Lilim and the stolen cargo. Heavy pressure rained from the sky without warning. The red-haired man stood motionless, arms stretched, as the force screamed toward the fairies below. Across the shattered ground, the orange-haired girl with twin tails looked up, eyes wide with panic, realizing she was the target. She screamed as the force struck with brutal force. The ground exploded beneath her, stone and dust flying. Her body hit hard, pain surging through her as she lay sprawled across the debris. Gritting her teeth, she groaned that she was about to be crushed. Fury sparked in her golden eyes as she glared, fists clenched. His voice echoed as he demanded to know if she'd reflected at all. She answered, saying she wouldn't. She shouted that if she surrendered now, she'd be betraying everything. As queen, she had a duty, and she would not break. Looking above her at the red-haired man, silent, she cursed her luck. She muttered inwardly that running into someone like him was the worst kind of fate. She couldn't afford to lose to a monster like that. The girl screamed again, asking why he'd cancelled the spell. Why hadn't he just finished it? He finally answered that something had come to mind, something he needed to ask. Shocked, she gasped that there was still more. He demanded to know why she'd started a war. He said Timia could have lived quietly, stealing sweets and playing games like before. A memory flickered, two young girls laughing in peace. She lowered her gaze and said bitterly that he didn't understand, not like Othyde did. Her voice dropped, heavy with pain. She spoke of the monster surge after his disappearance, how weaker races like hers were pushed out. She recalled vividly how her people were attacked and turned away at human gates, faces cold, shields raised. So they made a choice. They would invade. They would use humans as a shield. It was their only chance. Her voice was steady now, almost cold. She said it again. They would use them. The red-haired man repeated her words back to her. Use them as a shield. She explained further. Even if they failed, it would reignite fear of monsters across the nations. Her kind, weak monsters, were being hunted to extinction. She asked if he truly believed they were wrong. Then she admitted, quietly but clearly, that it hadn't mattered. They were stopped effortlessly, by him, by Luke Othyde. Lowering herself to the ground, Timia bowed. She offered her life. Her voice trembled as she begged him, spare the others. The man didn't respond immediately, then he said her name, Timia. He told her to come to Azuma village. Timia froze. She asked what he meant. Luke replied that he would protect all of them. Her breath caught. She stared, stunned. She stammered, unsure how to respond. He added that in return, they must never attack humans again. The plan was hopeless from the start, he said. Even if he hadn't stopped them, others would have. The capital was full of people they couldn't defeat. Timia flinched at the realization. She muttered in disbelief, others like him? Luke nodded and pointed out that she clearly hadn't known that. Timia asked if he was serious. Luke confirmed that he was. In that moment, her eyes widened. She recognized the truth. She said to herself that he wasn't lying. She could tell, because she was a liar too. Her shoulders dropped. Quietly, she admitted it was a total defeat to Luke Othyde. Then she looked up, meeting his gaze. She agreed. They wouldn't harm humans again. She extended her hand toward him and warned him seriously, he better keep his word. Luke smiled gently and promised that he would. 2 weeks later, Azuma village had settled into peace. The village chief took a pouch from the apothecary, thanking her for the perfect medicine and apologizing for the trouble. Lilim smiled and said if he wanted to thank someone, he should thank Mr. Lugo. The old man chuckled and replied that he did, every day. Lilim smiled quietly to herself. She figured as much. Thanks to Lugo, all the missing cargo had been recovered. Her herbs, tools, everything she needed to continue her work as an apothecary, was safe. Well, she thought, she could work normally again, but... She turned to the village chief and asked what he thought of Azuma now. The chief chuckled and said he believed it had become a better place than ever. Then he turned to someone else and asked, right, Harmel-san? Harmel beamed and asked Timia if she liked the sweet buns. Timia's eyes sparkled. She said she'd never eaten anything so soft and chewy, and that they looked adorable too. Absolutely perfect. Many sylphs had settled in Azuma. They carried goods with ease, cheerfully announcing they'd handle everything. Villagers thanked them warmly. They patrolled the outskirts, calling themselves the Sylph Elite Unit. They even gave shoulder massages to the elderly, drawing happy tears. Before long, they had become part of village life. From her window, Lilim watched them bustle around. She admitted to herself that all of this had been Lugo's doing. An elder echoed the sentiment, saying Lugo had been right, the alliance with the sylphs could help Ozma thrive. Lilim agreed aloud, but inwardly, she felt uneasy. The sylphs might be small and cute, but they were still monsters. They had stolen clothes. They had tried to steal souls. She narrowed her eyes. She couldn't forget that. She didn't fully trust them. Yet, a voice interrupted her thoughts. It was Temia. Temia asked what she was thinking. Then, with a teasing smile, she noted that Lilim seemed close to Mr. Lugo. She asked if Lugo liked sweet buns. Flustered, Lilim replied that she didn't know. Probably no one hated them. She then asked suspiciously why Temia wanted to know. Temia grinned brightly and said it was obvious, she wanted to eat them with him. Lilim's face turned red. She thought to herself that fairy smiles were just unfairly cute. Honestly, it was a problem. Without thinking, she grabbed Temia and hugged her tight. Temia yelled for her to let go, squirming in protest. Lilim quickly apologized, red-faced. The elder turned to Lilium and asked if she remembered what day it was. Lilim looked confused. Lilim groaned and suddenly remembered. Today, officials from the capital were arriving for inspection. Depending on how the sylphs acted, they could still be labeled as monsters and exterminated. The elder waved it off, saying they were too cute for that to happen. He added that Lugo had already cleared the nearby monsters, but they still needed to be careful. She looked Temia in the eye and said, as their leader, she was counting on her. Temia nodded solemnly. She invoked the name of the Fairy King. Then she raised both arms high and declared with theatrical flair that with sweet buns and unmatched cuteness, they would dazzle the officials with hospitality. Lilim stood beside her, clearly skeptical. Temia added with a sheepish grin that even if sweet buns weren't exactly Azima's specialty, it would probably work. A carriage rolled smoothly along the forest path toward Ozma village. The woods were quiet, no monsters in sight. Inside, Guild Investigator Luluel sat with legs crossed, glasses perched low on her nose, pale green hair neatly tied. She reviewed her clipboard, noting how unusual this assignment was. Normally tasked with studying monster ecology, this time she'd been sent to report on a village where humans and sylphs supposedly coexisted peacefully. She sipped her tea and mused aloud that the villagers were probably being tricked. Turning to her companion, she addressed him as Garam and asked for his opinion. Broad-shouldered with reddish-brown hair, Garam replied bluntly. He said sylphs were cunning, playful on the surface but dangerously deceptive. He warned that even C-rank adventurers could be overwhelmed by them, and villagers stood no chance. That, he said, was why she'd requested a B-rank adventurer like him. Luluel told him she was counting on him. Garam nodded with confidence, admitting he wanted to impress and rank up to a class. He added that if the sylphs so much as twitched wrong, he'd cut them down without hesitation. Suddenly, the carriage jolted. Garam shouted, asking what happened. Luluel leaned out the window, urging him to look. Smoke curled in the distance. Luluel narrowed her eyes, guessing it could be a sylph prank, but it felt too elaborate. As they watched, his expression darkened. He muttered that it couldn't be. Then he barked at the driver to hurry. The carriage picked up speed, but from behind, a massive creature tore through the trees. It was a death worm. The monstrous thing slithered forward on hundreds of legs, its colossal body dwarfing the road. Garam's face twisted in panic. He shouted the name in horror. Luluel, stunned, whispered that it was her first time seeing one, and immediately began sketching it. Garam shrieked in disbelief, asking if she was seriously drawing it now. He shouted that they'd be crushed flat if it caught up. But Luluel remained calm, saying handling that kind of threat was the escort's job. Garam snapped back that not even a rank adventurers could kill one. Inside the carriage, both of them froze as the death worm gained on them, its shadow swallowing the path. Luluel's hand trembled as she sketched. She stated flatly that at moments like this, one rarely got the chance to write a will. She concluded calmly that this was the end. Unable to take it anymore, she screamed. The death worm reared back, preparing to strike. Garam grabbed the reins, muttering that if this was how it ended, then so be it. But before the beast could lunge, something slammed into it, a blur of red and force. The entire creature was launched skyward, its segmented body flipping and flailing through the air. It crashed to the ground behind them. Silence filled the carriage. Garam blinked, dazed. Luluel, eyes wide, remarked that he was stronger than he looked. But Garam corrected her quietly, saying that wasn't him. His eyes turned toward the road ahead. A lone masked figure stood calmly down the path, cloak fluttering behind him. At Azuma village, the investigators arrived safely. They thanked Lugo for the escort. Lugo simply said there was no need, then told them to speak with the chief. Garam crossed his arms and muttered they could have at least thanked him properly. Luluel teased that being outdone by a villager must sting his pride. Garam told her to shut up, though inwardly he doubted Lugo's simplicity. There was no way that man was just a regular villager. Inside the village, they were greeted by the village chief and Timia. With theatrical flair, Timia introduced herself as Fairy King Timia. The chief added that he was the village chief. Both struck poses they thought would impress. Luluel and Garam introduced themselves. Luluel explained that they were guild investigators here to inspect how humans and sylphs were coexisting. It was an unprecedented case, and they intended to record it thoroughly. The chief welcomed them openly. Timia chimed in, saying that since the sylphs arrived, life had improved drastically for the villagers. The chief confirmed it, and Timia added that Lugo would be joining them to show off how amazing they were. Lugo agreed. Timia grabbed his hand and declared it settled. From a distance, Garam watched. He said the sylph seemed like no ordinary creature. He had been observing her, and she hadn't left a single opening. Luluel speculated that perhaps Lugo's strength came from the village. She whispered to herself that she'd probe deeper. She activated her blessing, Ecchi, blessing of 100 plans. A purple magical interface appeared in her vision, scanning Timia. The display showed species, sylph, height, weight, and favorite food, Timia ratatouille. Luluel noted to herself that the data confirmed it. Timia truly had a blessing. She wasn't faking her power. Garam asked if she was impressed. Luluel admitted she was. Garam declared the trip worth it. The chief boasted that Timia was the cutest in the world, cuter than anyone in the royal capital. Luluel agreed silently. She wanted to learn more about her, but more than that, she wanted to know about him. Her gaze turned to Lugo. She activated her scan again. The interface glitched. Luluel blinked, confused. She pleaded mentally for at least his name, anything. But the screen distorted further. She gasped. His data was blank. The magical interface flared with static, strange symbols replaced the text. A shadowed figure appeared, glowing red eyes staring back through the spell. Luluel screamed. The magical backlash threw her backward. A voice echoed through the system. It said it would prefer if she didn't pry further. Her eyes widened in horror as the presence stared back, watching. Luluel froze, eyes locked on the flickering purple screen of her skill. The interface glitched violently, corrupted data flashing across her vision. Her ability, blessing of 100 schemes, was failing. Shadowy figures with red eyes surfaced from the distortion, a deep voice warning her not to peer any further. The energy surged, crackling with dangerous light. She stumbled back, losing balance, until a steady hand caught her. Lugo held her with calm precision and remarked that it was a close call. His expression didn't waver, while Luluel clutched her chest, struggling for breath. With a shaky voice, she asked who he was. Lugo replied as before, that it was better if she didn't know. Garam, alarmed, rushed over and asked if she was all right. Luluel forced a smile and claimed it was just a headache from the journey. Timia broke the tension with a dramatic declaration. She announced that their first stop would be the village's top apothecary, then gestured proudly at a humble building. Garam eyed the clinic, unimpressed, and quietly commented on how rundown it looked. Luluel scolded him. Luluel conceded that it didn't compare to capital clinics. Still, when Lugo tapped on the door and mentioned an emergency, it creaked open. Lilim appeared, cheerful and ready. She welcomed them in and quickly identified Luluel as the patient. Luluel nodded hesitantly. Lilim waved them all inside, leading Luluel to a back room. As Luluel lay down, Garam leaned toward Timia and muttered disbelief that the apothecary was just a girl. Timia scolded him again. Lilim overheard and laughed, admitting she wasn't as formal as a doctor. Timia countered proudly that she was an excellent apothecary. Garam remained skeptical. Luluel reassured him, saying she'd noticed the potent herbal scent clinging to Lilim. That alone proved her experience. Lilim smiled and asked Luluel to relax. She raised her hands and prayed for the minor spirits to guide her. A warm glow lit her palms. Luluel's breath caught as she asked if it was a blessing. Lilim confirmed, explaining she used the blessing of the minor spirits to help her treatments. As the light spread across her body, Luluel quietly observed. That made 3 people with blessings, Lugo, Timia, and now Lilim. She wondered what kind of village this really was. Lilim analyzed the magic flow and explained that it was disrupted, likely causing the headaches. Luluel blinked in surprise. Lilim could tell just from a scan. Lilim nodded and called to her assistant for medicines 6 and 17. Pisha Chan, a blonde sylph with a ribbon, cheerfully responded and fetched them. Garam was visibly shocked. A sylph assistant? Pisha returned quickly and handed the vials to Lilim, who thanked her. Pisha smiled and said it was nothing. Garam murmured in disbelief. This wasn't how humans and monsters were supposed to act. Lilim handed the medicine to Luluel, explaining that one would ease the headache and the other would stabilize magic flow. Luluel muttered that not even capital clinics delivered this fast. Lilim smiled and credited the sylphs. She explained they knew the forest better than anyone, always bringing back the rarest herbs. Thanks to them, the clinic could stock medicines once only found in the capital. Luluel watched as Lilim gently patted Pisha's head. The pink-haired girl's smile was radiant. But Luluel's gaze narrowed. Sylphs were still monsters. Why would they help humans this way? She looked down, conflicted. Then she made a decision. She lifted the pouch, sipped the medicine, and gasped. Light bloomed in her chest, warm and immediate. Her headache vanished, instantly. She exclaimed that it was incredible. Garam echoed her in awe, stunned by the speed and power. Luluel laughed, amazed. Lilim stood proudly and declared that she made it herself. Pisha added with a big grin that she helped too. Luluel watched them both, thoughtful. This girl, this young apothecary, had real skill. Leaving her here, hidden in a remote village, felt like a waste. She softly addressed her, Lilim San, and asked if she'd ever considered moving to the capital. Lilim looked confused. Luluel said her skills would be in high demand. The guild would back her. She could run a major clinic. She clapped her hands, excited, then stopped short when Lilim simply replied no. Luluel blinked, surprised. Lilim met her gaze, calm and sure. She said she loved Azuma village. Better tools would be nice, but she only wanted them to help the people here. Leaving would hurt those who relied on her. She added that she had Pisha and the other sylphs, and she grew every day because of them. The sylphs were amazing. Herb experts and even better scouts. She grinned and said they'd warned her about today's visitors. Luluel's eyes widened, meaning they had known she was coming? Timia stepped in proudly, confirming it. She said sylphs kept the whole village in check and reported anything unusual. Then she pointed a finger high and announced she wasn't leaving either. Azuma was the safest place on Earth, with Lugo around. Garam, watching silently, admitted to himself it all made sense now. The medicine, the unity, it was real. He turned to Lugo and called him a friend. He asked if Lugo could show them what he actually did day to day. Luluel added that she wanted to see too. Lugo gave a simple nod and said sure. Then, with a calm but sharp smile, he added, if they could keep up. As the sun dipped low and shadows stretched across the treetops, the forest filled with the thunder of frantic footsteps. Luluel ran hard, her face twisted with regret. She admitted silently that tagging along had been a mistake. Breath short, heart racing, she kept pace beside Garam, who looked equally strained. Earlier, Graham asked if Lugo could show him their usual routes. His voice was steady. Behind him, Luluel said she'd like to come too. Lugo agreed, but only if they could keep up. Moments later, Luluel screamed. A monstrous creature towered before them, eyes glowing, claws churning the earth. Another death worm, larger than the last, rose from the ground. Garam shouted that this one was even worse, a giant variant. He barked at Luluel to stop screaming and run. The creature's emergence sent tremors through the soil. Ahead of them, The chief sipped tea serenely and commented that such things were fairly common. He offered tea to the panicking bystanders. Garam, livid, demanded if he really thought now was tea time. Lugo clung to Garam, pale and trembling. Garam shouted that the monster was no ordinary worm. Lugo added that without reinforcements from the capital, Azuma would be wiped out. As dread mounted, Temia stepped forward, magic glowing at her fingertips. She announced that this was nothing. Golden particles swirled as she summoned her power. Lugo watched in awe and noted that the glow surrounding the beast resembled a soul. Temia explained that even monstrous souls could be stolen, though not this one. The worm was immune. A higher class entirely. Turning to Lugo, Temia asked if he could handle it. Lugo observed the beast and replied that the core sat on its forehead, but at that size, magic wouldn't reach. Garam suggested retreat. Lugo ignored him and stepped closer. He told Garam he had something useful on him. Garam blinked, confused, until Lugo reached for the sword at his waist. Garam barely had time to react before Lugo unsheathed it. Raising it with ease, Lugo prepared for battle. Temia urged him to finish it in one strike. Lugo, unfazed, said that wouldn't be a problem. The beast roared and reared back, ready to crush them. Lugo gripped the blade and muttered that it had been a while since he took this stance. Lugo watched closely. Something about his posture struck her. She whispered that she had seen it before. Garam turned to her, and she answered. It was the stance of Luke Othyde. Lugo moved. In a flash, he launched forward, the ground cracking beneath him. Energy surged around him like wind under pressure. The worm opened its mouth wide, unaware of the strike about to land. With a thunderous impact, Lugo's blade sliced clean through the beast. A burst of green liquid exploded as the worm's body split, collapsing with a final groan. Lugo stood still, his coat fluttering behind him in the wind of his own momentum. Temia shouted with joy that Lugo had done it again. Nearby, the village chief turned to the inspector and asked if she understood now. The old villager smiled and said simply that this was Azima's guardian. The inspector stood speechless before the massive corpse, then finally whispered that she understood perfectly. Later, her report was under review. She wrote that there were no sylphs in the great tree forest anymore, not because they vanished, but because they had integrated with Azuma. Their knowledge advanced farming. Their nimbleness transformed industry. Their speed improved communication. For a village with an aging population, the sylphs were a miracle. Why did they help humans? The report answered, because Azuma was safe, thanks to one man. The inspector paused, wondering if she should write about him. Graham encouraged her to include everything, calling Lugo a monstrous asset. Another added that Lugo's name, once met with suspicion, now inspired awe. That was how impressive he'd become. Clenching his fist, Graham declared he'd inform the guild master and ask to train under Lugo. If he could, maybe he'd reach a rank. The inspector nodded, murmuring that she understood. Earlier, she approached Lugo. She hesitantly asked if he had any plans to come to the capital. Lugo answered bluntly that he did not. The inspector sighed, saying she suspected as much, especially after Temia and Lilim had both turned it down too. Lugo replied that while he wasn't going, perhaps they might change their minds, if she kept trying. She looked at him in surprise and asked if he truly believed that. Lugo said that he did, if she kept reaching. The inspector's expression brightened with determination. Maybe, she thought, if she kept pushing. Even Lugo might accept someday. After all, now that Luke Othyde was gone, the world needed a new hero. Graham shouted that she got it. That he could indeed be such a figure. Luluel repeated to herself the words of her old friend, Lisha. Garam overheard and asked in surprise if she meant Lisha Merond, the strongest saintess from Luke's party. She confirmed it, then said she'd tell Lisha everything, about Lugo. Lilim and Pesha, tools in hand, prepared for the daunting task. With resolute expressions, Lilim explained that their backyard monster, an overgrowth of weeds, had to be vanquished. She and Pesha braced themselves for a final showdown. In an exaggerated duet, Lilim and Pesha screamed, "Wah!" as they wrestled with the weeding tools, their struggle so dramatic it became comical. Moments later, both collapsed onto the ground, groaning about their aching backs and declaring their weed-fighting efforts utterly exhausting. Pesha, Curiosity mingling with fatigue, asked Lilim why she decided, out of the blue, to tackle the backyard weeds. Lilim responded that she wanted to cultivate the herbs the sylphs gather, but Pesha pointed out they could so easily forage them in the forest. Lilim revealed her deeper worry. Monsters might ambush the sylphs, and she'd be devastated if they got hurt. Pesha, taken aback by Lilim's genuine care, felt tears form and, voice firm with emotion, declared she'd recruit the strongest helper. Pesha darted off in determination, leaving Lilim kneeling in the dirt. Suddenly, Lugo appeared, scythe in hand, calmly offering to finish the weeding. Lilim and Pesha visibly relaxed, though Lilim wondered aloud whether even Lugo, powerful as he was, could tackle the chaos of their yard. Holding up his scythe, Lugo warned Lilim to keep her distance. It would get dangerous. Lilim laughed, dismissing the notion that weeding could be hazardous, just as Lugo unleashed a swirling wind with a whisper of movement. In an instant, a fierce whirlwind erupted, sweeping the weeds away in a flash. Lilim and Pesha stared, mouths agape. Over and over they muttered, "Huh?" at Lugo's breathtaking feat. He stood on a weed-free patch, declaring his completion, while Lilim and Pesha gazed at him with wide, sparkling eyes. Pesha, awe in her voice, noted how he'd cleared the entire mess in one fluid sweep, and Lilim heartily agreed. Lugo leaned in, asking Lilim what she was doing out in the yard. Pesha answered that they were turning the space into a garden. Lugo asked what seeds Lilim intended to sow. She produced roca seeds. When he inquired whether she had others to plant, she requested herbs needed for stamina potions and healing. To Lilim's surprise, Lugo knelt in the soil and said, genuinely, that working the earth was oddly satisfying. Lilim beamed up at him, expressing heartfelt thanks and calling him a wonderful help. Pesha guided Lugo on the seed planting technique, and he nodded, impressed with their progress. Soon, the garden blossomed in neat, labeled rows, herbs and plants flourishing. Lilim thanked Lugo again, promising a future reward, but Lugo dismissed her concern, saying she only needed to ask whenever she wanted a man's help. Lilim's eyes widened in surprise. Reflecting aloud, Lilim found it strange that Lugo, rumored to have killed Luke and hunted by bounty, had never harmed her. Internally, she noted that despite his eerie black helmet, Lugo hadn't ever hurt anyone in the village. She mused that perhaps she could begin to place some trust in him, despite unsettling rumors. Encouraged, Lilim said she'd ask for Lugo's assistance going forward. He reassured her not to hold back, and diminutive Lilim eagerly agreed. She vowed that if Lugo ever needed help, she'd willingly lend her strength. Lugo accepted, stating he'd rely on her when needed. The scene shifted to the next day. A house boomed with a massive shout of shock and surprise at some unknown news. Pesha burst in, panic in her tone, asking Lilim what had happened. Horrified, Lilim pointed toward the table. Pesha gaped as Lilim revealed the table piled high with requests for medicine mixing. Pesha acknowledged the mountain of requests, and Lilim added that most formulas were delicate and required precise balance. She lamented how long it would take and confessed shock that some orders were for powerful aphrodisiacs, poisons, even sleeping drugs. She'd have to report them. Pesha agreed, incredulous, and questioned the legality. Together, they wondered how such requests had appeared. Just then, Lugo entered, announcing that he too had received a flood of letters. He speculated that Luluel must be behind spreading their names. Lilim shared mixed feelings, grateful yet annoyed, while Lugo plainly said he found their popularity ungrateful. Lilim and Pesha stared in disbelief when Lugo mentioned a request from the Holy Church of Eret. Pesha asked why that mattered. Lilim passionately explained that the Holy Church was home to Saintess Lisha Marente, once a member of Luke Othyde's party, a figure of wide renown. With curiosity, Lilim asked what the church wanted. Lugo revealed that Lisha had invited him to join a party and would soon visit Azima village. Lilim responded in disbelief, and both she and Pesha encouraged him to accept such an honor, but he firmly declined. Surprised, Lilim asked why. Lugo pointed to a past bad experience with Lisha, saying he feared she might harm him if they met again. Teasing, Lilim asked if it had been romantic drama. Lugo denied it, saying he just wanted to avoid her. Lilim noted his complicated past. Lugo then told Lilim he wanted her to meet Lisha in his place, and to decline the invitation. He repeated his request emphatically as Lilim sat bound to her chair and Pesha floated beside her in astonishment. The next scene. Lilim carried a tray bearing 2 cups of tea to unseen guests. Seated were Lisha Marente and a female knight named Liz. Lisha smiled warmly, thanking Lilim for the tea. Lilim took in Lisha's silken golden hair and graceful presence, clearly captivated. Saintess Lisha Marente smiled serenely, holding her teacup as a radiant aura surrounded her. Lilim, nervously, asked Lisha why she was here. Lisha kindly told her to relax. Lilim admitted she'd been too tense. At which point the fairy king Tiamia spoke up loudly, telling Lilim there was no reason to freak out. The fairy king Tiamia announced proudly that Lilim had been recognized by the fairy king and should stand tall and proud. Lisha noted she'd heard rumors of the fairy king Tiamia, who happily accepted the praise. Lilim expressed how honored she felt. Then Lisha abruptly changed the subject, asking about Lugo, which caused both Lilim and Tiamia to react with a startled, Lilim and Tiamia are visibly panicked, their voices raised in urgency as they insist that Lisha wait. They remind her that they had already declined her offer to relocate and made it clear they preferred staying in Azima village. Lilim's face is drawn with distress, her tension undeniable. Behind her, Tiamia flutters anxiously. In contrast, Liz, the knight, glares at them with icy intensity, her expression sharp and imposing, while Lilim and Tiamia shrink back in fear, clearly intimidated by the presence in front of them. With serene composure, Lisha intervenes, raising a hand and telling Liz to stop. She remarks with a soft smile that knights tend to be hot-blooded. Her voice remains calm as she explains that if Lilim, who she identifies as a future saintess candidate, were harmed, the consequences would be dire. Lilim's eyes widen in disbelief, startled by the sudden and shocking designation. She questions aloud whether Lisha truly means that she is to become a saintess. Lisha responds with cheerful certainty, confirming Lilim's future role. She begins listing Lilim's qualities, praising her for the intelligence she demonstrates in running the clinic, noting how even Luluel has been impressed. She continues by acknowledging the deep trust Lilim has earned from the villagers. Lisha then states that Lilim's most important gift is her healing presence, a trait she considers invaluable. For a moment, Lilim is too stunned to react. Lisha then firmly grasps Lilim's hands, sealing her intentions by declaring it settled. Lilim is to become a saintess. Lisha's face glows with excitement as she says that, as a saint, Lilim could bring great glory to the faltering holy church. Lilim immediately panics. She exclaims that she doesn't understand any of this and realizes in that moment that Lugo's warnings had been right. Lisha's grip tightens as she holds Lilim's hands and continues to smile, her sparkling eyes now brimming with determination. In her mind, Lilim recalls Lugo's warning. He had told her in a low, serious voice that Lisha would come on strong right from the beginning. She had questioned him then, reminding him that Lisha was known for being graceful and affectionate. She had wondered how someone with such a reputation could be overpowering, but Lugo had confirmed it was all part of her tactic. He had elaborated that Lisha's grace and composure were a deliberate strategy used to disarm people, allowing her to completely take over the conversation before they even realized it. He had warned Lilim that she would need to push back, and push hard, to regain any semblance of control. That memory strikes Lilim hard. She now understands if she doesn't take the lead, everything will unfold exactly as Lugo said. With renewed resolve, she clasps her hands tightly and announces that she has something to say to Lady Lisha. Lisha tilts her head and asks if something is wrong, her expression inviting and curious, giving Lilim the opening she needs. Steeling herself, Lilim states clearly that she, along with Tiamia and Lugo, has already rejected the offer to relocate to the capital. She adds that she must now ask Lisha to leave. Her voice is firm and unyielding. Lisha and Liz are caught off guard by the unexpected strength in Lilim's words. Lisha pauses before calmly stating that she now understands the misunderstanding, addressing Lilim's firm rejection without missing a beat. Before Lilim can respond, a teleportation circle begins glowing beneath their feet. Panic sets in immediately. Liz reveals the circle's destination, the capital. Lisha maintains her cheerful tone, explaining that once Lilim is officially inducted into the church, all of their concerns will be resolved. Tiamia, in alarm, grabs Lilim and screams for her to run. She is frantic, urging Lilim to get away from Lisha as quickly as possible. Lisha calmly observes Tiamiya and remarks how pleased she is that the fairy will be accompanying them too. The glowing light intensifies. Lisha gives the command to Liz, stating firmly that the time has come for them to depart. Lilim, frozen in place, realizes just how dangerous things have become. A flashback cuts through her panic. She sees herself waving off Lugo's warnings, dismissing them with a laugh and assuming he was just being overly dramatic. In contrast, Lugo's voice in the memory is grave. He warns her about Lisha's true nature, making her promise to call him if anything goes wrong. Suddenly, the present shatters back into motion. Lugo crashes through the wall, smashing it apart in a dramatic entrance. Dust and splinters fly as he breaks in. Lilim and Tiamiya watch in utter shock as Lugo lands in the room, and Lilim calls out his name in disbelief. Lugo, scanning the scene, confesses that he stayed nearby just in case. He admits he didn't expect Lisha to resort to a teleportation circle. Lilim and Tiamiya, desperate, scream for Lugo to help them. Lugo answers, yelling that he's coming as he lunges forward. Lisha, completely unshaken, smiles at the new development. She says with quiet satisfaction that it's quite convenient to have all three of them gathered now. Her face beams with delight as she gazes at them. Lilim and Tiamiya, unable to process what's happening, are stunned into silence, barely able to mutter a confused, damn. Lugo's heart sinks. He realizes in dread that he might not make it in time to stop the circle. A burst of blinding light floods the room as the spell fully activates. In an instant, they vanish, gone from the room, which falls into eerie silence. A beat later, a cheerful Pisha enters with a bright smile, carrying a plate of pancakes from Harmel-san. She calls out to everyone, but stops when she sees the room empty, confused by the strange silence. She wonders aloud where everyone has gone. The scene shifts. Now inside the towering headquarters of the Arad Holy Church, Lilim stands before a set of ornate vestments. She reaches out and touches them, then begins putting them on slowly. She feels conflicted. The clothes are beautiful, but it feels strange to wear them now. A flashback replays in her mind. She sees Lugo diving toward her as she is pulled away, and she recalls asking if the teleportation magic could be stopped. Lugo had answered with a grim no, confirming the spell was irreversible. His final advice rings in her ears. Cooperate for now, and don't make trouble. Reluctantly, Lilim accepts the reality and finishes putting on the ceremonial clothes. Minutes later, she stands before a mirror, dressed in the saintess outfit. Her eyes widen. She quietly admits that the clothes are surprisingly lovely. She runs her fingers over the detailed stitching and marvels at the quality, something she could never afford on her own. The golden trim catches the light, and she mutters that being a saintess really is on another level. Getting caught up in the moment, she poses and declares herself Saintess Lilim, dramatically demanding obedience. Suddenly, Tiamiya bursts in, yelling, "Wow!" and startling her. Tiamiya asks why she's taking so long. Embarrassed, Lilim quickly changes the subject and points out Tiamiya's outfit. Tiamiya proudly shows off her new look, a nun's habit. She declares herself Sister Tiamiya, grinning. Lilim can't help but think how precious she looks. Gushing, Lilim showers her with praise, but Tiamiya quickly remembers something urgent. She grabs Lilim's hand, saying there's something she wants to show her. She drags her down the hallway. They round a corner, and both freeze when they see Lugo. Tiamiya bursts into laughter, saying the white armor doesn't suit him. Lugo replies that it's a required uniform for the church's trial period. Lisha soon enters, smiling at all three of them. She compliments their outfits, saying they look wonderful. Her hands come together as she beams with absolute delight. With an air of formality, she announces that it's time to show them the chapel. They follow her inside a vast chamber filled with radiant light. Lilim and Tiamiya gasp in awe, struck by the beauty around them. Their eyes are drawn to a massive painting on the wall. It depicts an armored goddess beside a blazing phoenix. Tiamiya identifies the goddess, but curiously asks about the bird. Lugo replies that it's a phoenix named Benex. The girls react with amazement, remarking on its healing powers. The armored woman in the painting seems to deliver a warning about a vengeful, regenerating force. Lisha then comments on Lugo's extensive knowledge, which Lugo casually dismisses as common sense, leaving both girls completely puzzled. Taimia gazes up at the grand painting, her eyes wide with admiration. She exclaims that she wishes to be painted by the same artist, inspired by the majestic brushwork and the glory captured in every stroke. As she stares at the scene, Lugo beside her speaks with conviction, suggesting that she too could become a legendary figure, just like the ones immortalized on the canvas. The idea electrifies her. With a gleam in her eyes, she throws her arms around Lugo, energized by the thought of becoming a legend herself, and eagerly pledges to work even harder from that moment on. Lisha, standing nearby, turns her attention to Lugo. Lugo. She asks him whether he also aspires to such legendary status. With a light laugh, she compliments his strength and his vast knowledge, insisting that both qualities make him an ideal candidate to become a legend. Lugo, clearly uninterested in the notion, attempts to brush off the idea, making it clear he has no such ambition. He waves off the suggestion, his body language stiff. Undeterred, Lisha grabs Lugo's hand with renewed enthusiasm. She urges him to accept his fate as a holy knight, continuing to insist that he was born for legendary deeds, no matter how much he resists. She radiates excitement, refusing to back down, trying with all her charm to lure Lugo into embracing the holy knight path. She gestures back toward the painting, telling him to imagine himself immortalized there, forever captured beside the saintess. Taimia nods supportively, echoing her encouragement. Lisha's campaign only intensifies. She adds light-hearted fashion advice to her arguments, pointing out how well the armor suits Lugo's form, how regal he'd look as a holy knight. But before she can say more, Lugo suddenly pushes her away with a sharp movement, visibly annoyed. His voice is firm and final as he declares that he has absolutely no interest in becoming a holy knight. Lisha stumbles slightly from the force, clearly taken aback, while the others freeze in place, stunned by his sudden outburst. Lisha stands confused, trying to process Lugo's harsh response. She mutters that she was the one who originally invited him, so his refusal now feels personal. Taimia and Lilim exchange glances, quietly commenting on the drastic difference between Lugo's current response and how he didn't outright reject Lisha's invitation before. Lugo, brushing past the awkward tension, confidently asks where they're headed next. Lisha scrambles to give him directions, frantically trying to redirect him to the proper trial initiation route. A sense of unease settles between Lilim and Taimia. They whisper about how odd everything feels, how the situation has shifted in unexpected ways. Both women point out a strange inconsistency. Lugo claims to know Lisha, yet Lisha acts as if she's never met him. The contradiction nags at them, and they try to piece together what it could mean. Their confusion deepens as they exchange more theories. Lilim wonders aloud if Lugo's helmet might be obscuring his identity from Lisha. Taimia, intrigued, asks her to clarify. Lilim says that even with the helmet, Lugo's distinct voice and mannerisms should give him away. Taimia then suggests the helmet likely has a recognition-blocking enchantment, which would explain Lisha's complete lack of recognition. Understanding clicks into place. Lilim nods slowly, realizing that the helmet's magic is actively concealing Lugo's identity. They watch as other people pass by without acknowledging Lugo, further proof of the spell's effectiveness. Together, the two women quietly deduce that Lugo's helmet is a deliberate tactic to evade Lisha, an effort to avoid her overwhelming presence. The idea amuses them both, and Taimia hovers nearby with a mischievous smirk. Suddenly, their amusement is shattered by an unexpected sight. Lugo is surrounded by two new female admirers who fawn over him without restraint. They praise his strength, his form, his presence. Lugo, cornered by their attention, looks visibly uncomfortable. Lisha chuckles at the sight. Lilim blushes and looks away in embarrassment, but Taimia's face darkens with a scowl. Her jealousy burns as she remembers how Lugo never got this kind of attention back in Azima village. Lisha casually explains that the girls are excited due to the rarity of male company in their ranks. Lilim, concerned, questions how close the women are getting, almost clinging to Lugo. A visual cutaway appears, showing a male knight and illustrating the errant holy church's strict celibacy requirements for male devotees. Taimia fumes, calling the girls shameless for throwing themselves at him, even if the church has fewer restrictions for women. She sees as the girls press closer, and finally declares that she's going to chase them away. Before she can act, Lisha calmly assures her that there's no need. Lugo, moving quickly, takes a nun's hand and pushes them away. The clingy admirers fall back, surprised and confused. The other women gape in stunned silence, watching them leave. Lisha gives them a slight wave, as if inviting them to observe and understand what just happened. Lugo, still composed, apologizes politely to the group. He tells them he's on guard duty and will return when he's able. The women immediately swoon again, gushing over his respectful tone, his strength, and his elegant behavior. They press him for a promise to come back. Lugo assures them with a cheerful nod, confirming that he absolutely will, much to Timea's silent satisfaction. As the crowd grows, Lugo turns to Lilim and asks her to take his hand. He acknowledges how it might seem inappropriate, but says it's necessary for safety. He explains that holding her hand ensures her protection, especially in a situation that could attract spies. Lilim's face flushes bright red as people begin to stare, clearly flustered by the attention. The nearby onlookers murmur with envy, admiring Lugo's chivalry and whispering about Lilim's closeness to him. Internally, Lugo justifies his decision. He believes that in the presence of potential threats, keeping her close is the most efficient way to protect her. Timea, seeing this, blurts out in frustration, asking why Lugo won't hold her hand too. Lugo answers coolly, explaining that he needs one hand free to fight and protect them both. Timea processes his response and turns red with embarrassment, realizing his reasoning is sound. She huffs, whining under her breath as Lisha gracefully suggests they continue the tour. The group proceeds through the church's grand halls, arriving at the Grand Cathedral. Lisha gives an elegant explanation of the statue's historical significance. Lilim smiles and lets out a soft, ooh, of appreciation. A few moments later, when they reach the sacred altar, she gasps again, whispering a whoa at the sheer splendor. Lisha then leads them into the choir room, explaining that this is where the saintesses come to sing. Both Lilim and Timea eagerly agree that it sounds like fun. Lilim, Timea, exclaims with excitement that the errant church feels like a sacred theme park. Lisha, amused, thanks her for the compliment. Lilim giggles, calling Lilim a total goof. Lugo, serious as ever, corrects them both. He reminds them that the church is not a theme park, it's a fortress. He warns that the exterior grounds are crawling with holy knights. Lisha, hearing this, calmly asserts that sometimes force is necessary to protect the saints and the sisters. Her words cause Lilim to tense up slightly, her expression shifting to one of visible discomfort. Lisha stands before a towering pair of ornate doors and cheerfully announces that they've arrived at their final destination. With pride in her voice, she reveals that the last facility on the tour is the sacred sanctuary, Ludilna. Her expression grows serious, her determination evident as she steps forward. Lilim and Timea follow close behind, their eyes sweeping across the vast space. They observe that the sanctuary is large, completely empty, and stark white, so immaculate it almost feels sterile. One of them remarks that the place feels lonely, echoing the solemn stillness of the room. Lisha, however, insists that this space is the most important of all. At the center of the sanctuary rests a pedestal, atop which lies a holy scripture. Lilim asks whether this truly is the sacred text. In response, Lisha extends her hand and gently invites her to come closer, wearing a soft smile. Lilim hesitates for a moment, thinking of Lugo. Her mind drifts to his calm demeanor, and she tells herself to trust him, believing that, no matter what happens, he will protect them. Meanwhile, Lugo quietly reassures Timea that he detects no immediate threat. He admits that refusing to proceed now would likely stir unnecessary conflict and affirms that he'll stay alert and on guard regardless. In the sanctuary, Lisha and Lilim now stand before the altar. Lisha takes the woman's hands and places them gently on the scripture, encouraging her to pray to the goddess Erit. Lilim's eyes glisten, clearly overwhelmed. Sensing her nerves, Lisha offers a calming smile. Lilim notes something strange. The scripture is blank. There are no words written on its surface. Lisha explains with gentle certainty that the prophecy of the goddess Erit only reveals itself when someone possessing the qualities of a saintess offers a sincere prayer. Lisha tells Lilim not to be afraid and asks her to place her hands on the scripture again. She links this moment to Lugo's earlier mention of a divine revelation that had once occurred in Azima village. She begins recounting the prophecies. The first one, foretelling that a girl born of monsters in Azima village would bring salvation, and the second prophecy, foretelling the coming of the long-awaited one. Her eyes narrow with intensity as she speaks of the third prophecy, the one she calls troublesome. Lisha clarifies with excitement that the chosen saint must be a beautiful human girl with extraordinary gifts. Lilam's face crumples in distress as she listens. Lisha quickly compliments Lilam, saying that even in their short time together, her charm and talent have been unmistakable. Lilam's unease rises sharply. She tries to pull her hands away, asking Lisha to stop and questioning whether she knows something about her that she hasn't shared. But Lisha holds on tightly. She states firmly that only human girls are allowed to become saintesses. Watching from a distance, Timea asks Lugo if he thinks Lisha's behavior seems strange, particularly her closeness to Lilam. Lugo responds that something indeed feels wrong. Lisha leans in and, in a quiet, conspiratorial voice, suggests that the rule about saintesses needing to be human might be an issue for someone. Lilam trembles, terrified. Lisha's tone turns cold. She warns Lilam that Lugo and Timea won't make it in time to help her. She threatens that if Lilam attempts to escape, she'll be branded a monster. As she speaks, a glow begins to form around Lisha's hand. Her grip tightens as she holds Lilam still, demanding that she pray unless she wishes to die. Her eyes burn with merciless determination. She forces Lilam's hand against the scripture, insisting that if she is truly innocent, she must prove it to the goddess. Lisha's tone grows urgent as she urges Lilam to hurry and place her hands properly. Lilam, trembling, sobs as she realizes she has no other option. She does as told, her hands resting on the scripture, and she silently pleads with the goddess to hear her. Outside the sanctuary, Timea turns to Lugo, asking what the strange light is that's now emanating from the scripture. Lugo reacts instantly, exclaiming in alarm. A golden light bursts from the scripture's surface, casting a blinding glow. Words begin to form. An unmistakable message. This girl is not human. Lisha's expression darkens. Surrounded by magic, she glares at Lilam and commands her to die. With cruel satisfaction, she declares Lilam the wretched monster of calamity, announcing that divine punishment has now been delivered. The golden light intensifies, engulfing Lilam entirely. But before harm can reach her, Lugo charges in and catches Lilam in his arms, holding her protectively. Lilam looks up, shaken, and sees blood on his arm. Lugo dismisses the wound as just a scratch. Lisha reappears in front of them, coldly commanding Lugo to stand down. She accuses Lilam of being a monster in disguise and demands that he hand her over. She summons numerous magic circles, declaring that the creature must be destroyed before she causes irreversible harm. Lilam cries out desperately, pleading that the accusations aren't true. She clings to Lugo, repeating his name, trying to find comfort in his presence. From within his arms, she keeps denying the accusations, and Lugo whispers an apology, telling her once more that it's going to be okay. He holds her tightly, even as his wound bleeds, and expresses regret that they hadn't escaped sooner. Lisha, now surrounded by glowing circles of magic, confronts them. She is unwavering, challenging Lugo's attempt to flee. At that moment, Timea jumps into the fight, aiming landing above Lugo. She grabs Lugo's armored arm and flies away, surprising Lilam, who apologizes, but Timea shouts furiously that Lisha is the enemy and urges him to escape with Lilam now. Tiamea's eyes widen as golden magic circles erupt all around them. Lugo identifies the magic as teleportation circles. An army of holy knights materializes before them, summoned by Lisha. She stands triumphantly above them on a stairway, surrounded by radiant magic, declaring with grim satisfaction that there will be no escape. Lisha still looms over Lugo and his companions, glowing circles pulsing around her. She declares again that they are trapped. In Lugo's arms, Lilam expresses worry over his bleeding arm and blames herself for the injury. He gently reassures her. Then he asks her to raise her hands, and she hesitantly obeys. He tells Timea he's entrusting Lilam to her. Timea nods, saying she's ready. Lilam cries out Lugo's name as Timea flies away with her. Lugo raises his bleeding arm, assuring Timea that he has no intentions to die. The Holy Knights wonders if he's surrendering. Then, unleashing his power, Lugo summons a vortex of gravity magic behind him. Lisha recoils in shock, questioning his ability to use gravity magic. Lugo uses it to pull away from the knights, while Timea and Lilam cling together, disoriented by the momentum. Timea is flung through the air, yelling in panic. She clutches Lilam tightly, soaring above the battlefield. Lisha yells after them, trying to make sense of their erratic movement. Tiamia calls out to anyone in her way to move, dodging the glowing circles. Then she crashes into a group of knights, knocking them back with a thunderous body slam. Orders ring out for the knights to retaliate. Lugo watches and murmurs that he trusts Tiamia completely. Tiamia, despite the chaos, shouts jokingly that he's a fairy king driver. She calls on the wind and releases a burst of powerful magic, scattering the knights like leaves. She tells Lilam to hold on, and Lilam answers with a loud yes. Eyes focused, Tiamia spots something below. She calls out her discovery to Lilam. The magic circle. Lisha reacts in horror as she realizes their plan. Lugo explains that the teleportation circle isn't one way. If they reach it in time, it can send them back to their starting point. More knights begin to fall into the circle. Lisha orders her forces to stop them with magic, but Tiamia shouts back that it's too late. She proclaims their escape, though they still don't know where it will lead. As the golden light consumes them, Lilam stares at Lugo with worry. Lugo, surrounded by magical energy, tells them to go ahead. He'll handle the rest. He stands firm, ready for what comes next. Lisha, standing atop the staircase, points her blade and voice at Lugo, accusing him of betraying not just her, Saintess Lisha, but the entire Rat Holy Church. Her tone sharpens as she warns him not to underestimate her power, claiming that as a saintess, she wields a force that should terrify even him. She raises her voice with righteous pride, revealing her past as a famed adventurer who once journeyed with the legendary hero Luke. She tells the onlookers how she once wielded a radiant golden sword as part of Luke's party, and proclaims herself the rightful guardian of the world, declaring her duty to destroy all who bring it harm. Lugo watches quietly, offering only a calm confirmation that he knows that already. He recalls a memory depicting him bound and Lisha herself delivering the final blow. Lugo stands tall, and the deep wound on his arm begins to seal shut, revealing his ability to recover without casting magic. Lisha notices and snaps in fury, calling him a monster for healing that way. She declares that he is just another abomination and accuses him of leading 3 more monsters into the sacred sanctuary. Lugo responds firmly, defending Lilam and Tiamia. He insists that they are peaceful and that they deserve to live alongside humans. Lisha shouts her condemnation at him, furious that he would stand with creatures she sees as threats. With a scream, she raises her sacred blade and vows to strike him down. Her golden magic flares, and she hurls a powerful attack directly at Lugo. The force of her magic is overwhelming, and her glare tracks every movement he makes. As wave after wave of golden light lashes out, Lugo dodges, his movements precise and focused. She watches in disbelief as he evades her divine blade and her radiant spells. Her voice rises in astonishment as she accuses him of being a monster, citing the impossible blend of gravity magic and regeneration. Lugo responds with eerie calm, stating she's called him that before. Lisha snarls that she has never done any such thing, calling the claim absurd. With fury, she brings her glowing sword down in a thunderous strike. Lugo jumped back to avoid the blow, and she approaches with fire in her eyes. She questions how he dares to act like they've met before. Magic flares around her as she declares that no monster like him should ever be left to roam free. Without hesitation, Lisha drives her golden sword straight through the ground, prompting golden energy crackling around him. Lugo remains silent, even as his body is racked by the burning light. Lisha's expression doesn't waver, her gaze full of absolute resolve. She declares that all monsters must be eradicated and continues to strike, pouring golden energy into each blow. She raises her voice to the holy knights around her and orders them to finish the job. The knights surround Lugo, swords drawn, eyes fierce. The air fills with rhythmic metallic thuds as armored knights advance. Lugo turns his head and tells them not to interfere. A powerful impact slams into them, and they cry out with a hoarse, "Gah!" Several knights are tossed into the air by the force of his defense. Lisha smiles coldly and suggests that Lugo form a party with her. Lugo instantly refuses. In response, Lisha slashes toward him again with lightning speed. The blade connects with a thunderous boom, and golden light explodes across the room from her strike. Lisha gasps as she realizes Lugo is no longer in front of her. A burn mark has taken his place. A fallen knight shouts for her to look behind her. Her eyes widen in alarm as Lugo prepares to strike back. His fist shoots forward as she frantically calls for a defensive wall. With a flicker of light, she manifests a golden circle just in time. Lugo's punch crashes into her shield, golden light clashing with his gravity-infused force. The impact forces her back, her footing slipping. The golden magic cracks under the pressure. She recoils, trying to regroup. But Lugo presses forward, relentless in his counterattack. Lisha declares she won't be defeated, yelling that her battle is for humanity's protection. She sweeps her blade in a wide arc, sending another wave of golden light across the space. Lugo dodges, calling out the name of her holy sword technique. She pauses, shocked that he knows it. Lugo explains that the technique has a weakness. At extreme close range, it leaves her open. Lisha's eyes flash in pain as she realizes too late that he's exploiting that very flaw. He confirms what she's already understood. He's studied her techniques and knows their vulnerabilities. Lisha grits her teeth and admits that he's too strong, even with her mastery of both defensive magic and swordplay. Lugo pushes her further, taunting her for being so focused on defense. He asks why someone who once fought so boldly is now afraid to strike first. He watches for her reaction, his tone cold but measured. Inside her mind, Lisha reflects on what he's said. She considers Lilim a threat, yes, but Lugo is worse, because he's protecting her. She readies herself and announces that now, she will act. She raises her golden blade high and declares that this time, she will condemn him herself. With renewed energy, she brings her sword down in a brutal golden slash. Lugo sidesteps, avoiding it with fluid ease. Lisha stares, stunned that he continues to avoid everything she throws at him. Her disbelief grows as she watches him move, calm and composed. From her memory, a flashback stirs. She sees herself, years ago, as the saintess standing beside hero Luke's party. She remembers how many monsters she cut down with her holy sword. Her most painful memory returns. She recalls raising that very blade and beheading the hero himself, on the command of the kingdom. She reflects bitterly on her mistake, admitting to herself that it may have been her actions that triggered the resurgence of monsters. She confesses to herself that she was indeed mistaken. She falls to the ground and whispers that if she must fall, then gravity magic would be a fitting end. Lugo steps forward and pours a healing potion over her injured form. She stares up, confused by the act. Lugo tells her that her movements lose their precision when she lets herself get angry. He points out that she becomes careless when she thinks she has the upper hand. Lisha demands to know who he really is. Lugo tells her that he has always warned her to be better, yet she never changed. He removes his helmet, letting his red hair fall freely, and says that she should already know the answer. Lugo, now unmasked, greets Lisha by name. Her eyes widen in horror as she gasps, finally recognizing him. Luke. Luke turns to the kneeling knights and offers them healing medicine from his village. The knights, stunned, begin to rejoice at the return of the hero. But Lisha backs away. Her voice trembles as she calls him a fake. Her hands shake. She stares at him, and her mind reels, remembering the day she ended his life. But now, he stands before her, real and alive. And as the truth dawns on her, her expression shifts from denial to raw, horrified realization. Luke questions Lisha, his voice calm but firm, as she trembles in place, struggling to respond. She stammers that she knows she must apologize, her voice cracking as she admits she remembers the moment vividly. Her hands, clenched tightly around the hilt of her sword, seem stained with phantom blood as the memory returns with brutal clarity. The image of that day overwhelms her. Her blade cutting through, the sound of it, and the feeling in her arms as she beheaded him. She sees it again, his lifeless body falling forward, the light fading from his eyes. She remembers the blood on her hands, vivid red, impossible to ignore. The way it pooled at her feet, soaking the ground, splashing her robes. She recalls the cold weight in her chest as she struck down his helpless form. The memory won't let go. Next comes the image of his body burning under the darkened night sky, flames licking at the remains she once called comrade. Her voice falters as she confesses to Luke that everything she did was because the kingdom had ordered it. Luke, still facing away from her, answers evenly, he already knows. Lisha chokes out his name through sobs, reaching toward him, begging him not to turn his back. She pleads for him to stay, her voice full of desperation. Her fear boils over as she admits how terrified she's been. The tears pour freely now, streaming down her cheeks as she continues to cry out his name, her words repeating as if they could undo the past. She weeps uncontrollably, unable to stop herself, begging him to forgive her over and over again. Liz Auric, her voice cutting through the moment as she asks Lisha what's wrong. But Lisha doesn't answer. Her gaze remains locked on Luke, her tears flowing. Liz moves to embrace the weeping saintess, offering comfort as she clutches Lisha's trembling frame. Liz's eyes shift to Luke, who remains still and silent. She questions him, puzzled by his behavior and armored presence. She tilts her head and asks if he is the holy knight everyone's been whispering about. Introducing herself with unwavering pride, Liz states she is Lisha's personal holy knight. Luke turns his head slightly and calmly asks if she was listening. Then, without emotion, he reveals the truth. Lisha killed him. Liz's breath catches, her face frozen in disbelief. He confirms it flatly, leaving no space for doubt. Liz stares at him, then turns her shocked eyes to Lisha. Liz explains that after Luke's death, Lisha was devastated. She recalls how Lisha threw herself into her work, passionately organizing countermeasures against the growing threat of monsters and working to shelter displaced orphans. A flashback shows Lisha giving orders, coordinating missions, holding sobbing children in her arms. Liz continues, emphasizing how deeply Lisha believed in building new hope. She reveals that Lisha searched tirelessly for new heroes, Lugo, Lilim, Tiamia, all chosen for the mission she thought necessary. Luke watches quietly as Liz supports Lisha, her hand on the saintess's shoulder. With a trace of sarcasm, he remarks how splendid it all seems. Liz turns toward him, her expression caught between anger and pain, and asks if he truly believes Lisha's grief and tireless efforts were just an act. Luke gives her no answer, instead suggesting she ask Lisha herself. Lisha doesn't move. Her head remains bowed, her lips trembling, eyes hidden behind the veil of her hair. Liz's voice hardens. She presses again, asking if Lisha's silence is her answer. Lisha finally whispers a broken apology. Liz gasps, stunned by the quiet admission. She throws her arms around Lisha again, clearly shaken. Her words come quickly, barely held together. She tells Lisha that they, the holy knights, the people, put their faith in her. She speaks of the consequences. The void left by the hero's death, the new orphans made, the knights who died trying to fill Luke's shoes. Liz's voice cracks as she asks if everything, the pain, the chaos, was because of Lisha's decision. She shakes Lisha with both hands, calling her name, begging her to answer. Lisha, still weeping, can only apologize over and over, her face tight with anguish. The weight of guilt finally crashes down as Lisha collapses, overcome with shame. Liz stares at her in wide-eyed disbelief, her body frozen as she realizes what Lisha has confessed. Kneeling beside her, Liz speaks in a hushed voice, shocked beyond words. Luke gently tells Liz not to be too hard on her, but the holy knight looks torn, unable to reconcile what she's just learned. Lisha tries to speak, her voice cracking as she repeats that the kingdom ordered the execution. Liz reacts as if struck, the horror in her face deepening. Now she questions everything, the purpose of their sacred order, their loyalty, their cause. Luke steps forward and warns them all to stand down. He tells them that if they act against the kingdom, they will be marked for death. When Liz protests, he grimly confirms the cost, his own assassination. The room falls silent as Liz stands stunned. Turning to Liz, he calls her name, then slowly puts his mask back on. He declares that the man she knew is gone. He is now only Lugo of Azima village. Liz nods, pulling herself together and acknowledging the command with military precision. Luke, now Lugo, turns to Lisha and warns her not to touch Lilim or Tiamia again. Lisha, still broken, nods in silence. Lugo then commands the knights to forget everything that occurred. He warns them that if anyone reveals his identity, they'll regret it. The knights exchange glances and nod in solemn agreement. Liz steps forward and states clearly that none among them would dare defy Lugo the Hyde. Lugo walks to the great doors and pauses. He asks that they be opened. Lisha and Liz look at him in confusion. He turns back and says plainly that only the saintess can open them. Lisha startles at the realization. With trembling steps, she approaches the ornate doors, guilt weighing on her shoulders. Her mind flashes back to her betrayal, her blade, and the man she once respected above all. Light erupts from the doors as they open. Lugo offers a short apology for the trouble he's caused and walks into the glow. The doors close behind him with a thunderous slam. Leisha stares at the sealed passage, her strength finally giving way as she collapses. Liz drops beside her, gathering the sobbing saintess in her arms. Liz tries to soothe her, saying that it hurts to watch her like this, but that true regret can give birth to redemption. Leisha nods faintly. Liz stands. She apologizes again and walks away, saying she needs time to clear her head. As she disappears into the corridor, Leisha recalls. In her memory, Leisha stands before an altar, her hands clasped in desperate prayer. She begs the goddess for answers. Her eyes snap open in terror as a divine message appears, glowing in front of her. The command is absolute. She must kill Luke Othyde. Leisha recoils, her voice choked with disbelief. The message continues, warning that if she fails, the entire kingdom will fall. The memory shifts. Leisha kneels before an elder, Ortram, explaining the divine command. She pleads with him, calling Luke his apprentice, but Ortram remains cold. He tells her the goddess is never wrong and admits even he doesn't fully understand Luke's power. Leisha, tears in her eyes, hesitates, then gathers her sacred power, her resolve hardening. Ortram instructs her to report only to the king and keep the prophecy secret. No one else must know. In the present, Leisha slumps against the sealed door, biting down on her own arm, gripped by shame. Her words falter as she stammers in despair. Meanwhile, far ahead, Lugo walks in silence. His thoughts turn inward. He tells himself that what remains of him is no longer human. All he has left is to take care of Lilium. Tiamia and Lilim rushed through the bustling streets of the city, their hearts pounding as they dodged past startled pedestrians. The nun and the saintess moved swiftly, their robes fluttering behind them. Tiamia, gripping Lilim's hand tightly, glanced back repeatedly, her eyes wide with urgency. Lilim, still dressed in the ornate saintess vestments, stumbled slightly as she tried to keep pace. Her breath came in short gasps, and she clutched the fabric of her gown to avoid tripping. The weight of the situation pressed heavily on her, but she forced herself to focus on escaping. As they rounded a corner, Tiamia skidded to a halt, her wings fluttering nervously. She turned to Lilim, her voice low but frantic. She exclaimed that they couldn't stop, not even for a moment, because the holy knights would surely be after them. Lilim nodded, her face pale but determined. She replied that they needed to find a safe place, somewhere the church wouldn't think to look. Tiamia's eyes darted around before landing on a familiar building, the Adventurers Guild. She pointed excitedly and declared that the guild might be their best chance. Lilim hesitated, biting her lip. She murmured that they couldn't involve innocent people, but Tiamia shook her head firmly. She insisted that Lugo had left them a way out, and they had to trust his plan. With renewed resolve, the two girls pushed open the guild doors and stumbled inside. The noise of the crowded hall died down momentarily as heads turned toward them. Tiamia, panting, straightened her nun's habit and put on a bright, if slightly forced, smile. She announced loudly that they were terribly sorry for bursting in unannounced. A nearby adventurer raised an eyebrow, crossing his arms. He remarked dryly that it was a little early for a masquerade, his tone skeptical. Tiamia's smile faltered for a second before she recovered, waving her hands dismissively. She introduced herself as Tiamia, a nun of the church, and gestured to Lilim, declaring her to be Saintess Lilim Sama. The guild members exchanged glances, murmuring among themselves. What business a nun and a saintess had with the Adventurers Guild? Tiamia's wings twitched nervously, but she held her ground. Lilim, standing slightly behind her, clutched the fabric of her robes tighter, her eyes darting around the room as if expecting holy knights to burst in at any moment. Two figures stepped up behind them, telling Tiamia to stop with the weak lies. Before seeing who spoke, Tiamia panics, wondering how they saw through her and if she should get Lilim and escape, but where would they go? Upon seeing who it was, Lilim exclaims in relief while Tiamia turns around to see the two adventurers from before. Luluwell asks what they are up to. After settling down at a table and explaining the situation, Luluwell apologizes deeply, since she was the one who got them into this mess. Lilim laughs awkwardly while Graham jumps in asking if they are here to become adventurers, looking clearly excited. Tiamiya quickly clarified that they weren't there to become adventurers, saying that besides, the one who he is interested in is Lugo anyway. She reached into her robe and pulled out a sealed letter, holding it up for all to see. She declared that Lugo had given it to her before Lisha took them to the Holy Church. She recited his instructions, explaining that he had told her to deliver the letter to the guild's big shot, in case of an emergency. Then she addresses Luluwell, saying that since she knows Lisha, she must be the big shot here, right? Luluwell smiles awkwardly. She muttered that he wasn't a big shot, but she knew someone who might be able to help. She admitted that she owed Lugo. Her eyes narrow as she ponders. A request from the incredibly powerful Lugo is probably beyond her ability to handle, in which case. She sighed and motioned for them to follow her to see the guildmaster. As they moved deeper into the guild, the scent of herbs and aged parchment grew overwhelming. Tiamiya wrinkled her nose, muttering that she was going to lose her sense of smell. Lilim, still clutching her robes, glanced around nervously. She whispered that this was the guildmaster's room. Why did it smell so strong? Luluwell chuckled dryly. She remarked that the smell is pretty harsh until you get used to it. Tiamiya cries out that she doesn't want to get used to that, to which Graham laughs loudly and says that this is their destination while pushing the door open. As the doors open, the smell becomes way worse, causing even Luluwell to cover her mouth. Tiamiya pushes Lilim to go first, but the latter tells her that she should do that. Graham appears behind them and pushes them inside, taking them by surprise. Inside, they see a small figure, barely visible under the smoke of concoction. Lilim looked up, her eyes studying the figure. She murmured in surprise, noting how young she looks. Luluwell introduced her as the master. Then she calls out to her, saying that she has visitors. She looks back and sees Graham and Luluwell along with two new faces. She comments that it looks like a hassle. But she still hops down and tells them not to look so nervous. She welcomed them to the Adventurers Guild, introducing herself as Lara, the guildmaster and an alchemist. She smiles as she says that it's nice to meet them. Tiamiya and Lilim are both surprised for two different reasons. Lilim is surprised about her being an alchemist, while Tiamiya is about her being the guildmaster.